What if the man standing next to you at a gas station had already unalived 4 women and no one knew? Thomas Warren Whisenhant wasn't a name that made national headlines. He didn't have the infamy of Bundy or the media circus of Dahmer, but in the humid back roads of Mobile County, Alabama, he was something far more terrifying. Invisible, a man who could walk into a convenience store, strike up a conversation, and leave behind nothing but blood and silence. This isn't just another true crime story. This is about the slow burn of violence, the fractures in a system that let a killer slip through the cracks again and again, and the 4 women whose lives were stolen in the most brutal ways imaginable. By the time you reach the end of this, you'll understand why Thomas Whisenhant spent over 3 decades on death row, and why even that wasn't enough time to answer the questions his life left behind. Thomas Warren Whisenhant entered the world on January 29, 1947, in Pritchard, Alabama, the youngest of 4 children born to Willie and Emma Whisenhant. But from the moment he took his first breath, his childhood was marked by something twisted, something that would shape the monster he'd become. Emma Whisenhant wasn't an ordinary mother. She was domineering, controlling, and openly abusive toward her husband, Willie, a timid, physically weak alcoholic who rarely worked and spent most of his earnings on drinks. The household was a pressure cooker of dysfunction. Willie would stumble home drunk, attempting to seduce his wife, only to be met with rage. Emma would scream, wake the entire house, and then beat him with whatever she could find, encouraging her children to join in. I can remember a lot of times when my daddy was all bruised up. I can remember many times I would tell her, "Mama, please just leave him alone." But she always told us, "Your daddy keeps you from having anything because he drinks all the time." And I was convinced that that was the case, and I always defended her. But while Emma unleashed hell on her husband, she treated Thomas like royalty. He was her favorite, the apple of her eye. She forced him to share a bed with her until he was 7 years old. Even when he finally got his own bed, it was still in her bedroom. She spoiled him despite the family's poverty, giving him everything he wanted, and she watched him, constantly, obsessively. Thomas was a happy child at first, spoiled, yes, but carefree. But when he hit his teenage years, something shifted. Overnight, he transformed from a somewhat pampered kid into a moody, physically violent teenager. His siblings noticed the change immediately, but Emma's response wasn't to give him space. Instead, she doubled down on her control. She just did not let him out of her sight. She would go everywhere with him, never a moment alone. A psychologist would later conclude that Thomas deeply resented his mother, and that resentment was about to manifest in the most horrifying way possible. On May 6, 1963, when Thomas was just 16 years old, something happened that should have stopped him before his killing spree ever began. 72-year-old widow Lexie Haynes was found shot dead in Pritchard. When police arrived at the scene, they discovered the weapon in an empty lot right next to the Whisenhant family home. The investigators immediately zeroed in on Thomas. He was already known to local law enforcement. He'd been charged with robbing a blind woman, and there were whispers of other robberies and assaults on young girls. Legal technicalities and lack of witnesses had kept him out of serious trouble so far, but this time felt different. Then came the chilling detail. Witnesses reported that Thomas and his friends had been playing with a stolen revolver. Thomas had taken one of the bullets out of the gun, held it up in the air, and declared that it would be used to kill someone soon. And Lexie Haynes? She'd confronted him about his behavior. The investigators knocked on the Whisenhant family's door, and Willie answered. They came to the door and asked how long had Tommy been there, Evelyn recalled. And my daddy said that he had been there all night. I went along with Mom and Daddy that he was there. Willie lied. Whether it was fear of Emma or simply being too drunk to comprehend what his son was capable of, he provided Thomas with an alibi. And just like that, Thomas Whisenhant walked free. But Emma knew, and she started watching him even more closely. To escape his mother's suffocating grip and the suspicions that followed him, Thomas enlisted in the United States Air Force. He was stationed at Ent Air Force Base near Colorado Springs, Colorado. For a brief moment, it seemed like maybe the structure of military life would straighten him out. It didn't. On October 25, 1965, Thomas attacked 22-year-old Rose Covington in the finance office of the base. Without warning, without provocation, he grabbed a metal ashtray from the table and began beating her around the face and head until she lost consciousness. The attack was savage, brutal, and completely random. Rose later testified that she didn't even know who Thomas was. She'd never met him before. The beating left Rose hospitalized for 2 months with severe head and facial injuries. She had no memory of her attacker, but investigators found a shoe print at the scene that matched Thomas's shoes. Despite his denials, he was convicted of assault with intent to commit unaliving on March 14, 1966, and sentenced to 20 years in prison with hard labor. He was also dishonorably discharged from the Air Force. But here's where the system failed again. By 1970, his sentence was reduced to 10 years. And on November 28, 1973, just 7 years after his conviction, Thomas Whisenhant was granted parole. To the outside world, it looked like prison had reformed him. He got a job, married a woman, and had children. He seemed normal, stable. But beneath that surface, the real Thomas Whisenhant was still there, waiting. On November 21, 1975, 28-year-old Patricia Hitt was working the late shift at a convenience store in Mobile County, Alabama. She was a mother of 2, just trying to make ends meet. That night, a man walked into the store, approached her, beat her, and then shot her in the head. Patricia died at the scene. Initially, 2 other men were arrested for the crime. Thomas Whisenhant wasn't even on the radar. About 6 months later, on April 16, 1976, another convenience store clerk became a target. 44-year-old Venora Hyatt was working alone when Thomas Whisenhant walked in. He kidnapped her at gunpoint and took her to an old, abandoned house covered in kudzu vines. There, he unalived her and dumped her body near a shack. But he wasn't done. The following day, he returned to the crime scene and mutilated Venora's body. Then, in a move so cold it defies comprehension, he took her wristwatch and gave it to his wife as a present. His wife wore the watch of a dead woman, completely unaware. 23-year-old Cheryl Lynn Payton was working the late shift at a compact store in Mobile County. She was young, vibrant, with her whole life ahead of her. That night, Thomas Whisenhant walked into the store, pulled out a .32 caliber pistol, and kidnapped her at gunpoint. He drove her to a remote wooded area where he SA'd her in the front seat of his pickup truck. Then he shot her in the head, dragged her body into the nearby woods, and fled. But like Venora Hyatt, Cheryl's story didn't end there. The next day, Thomas Whisenhant returned to the crime scene. He mutilated her body, cutting off a large part of her breast and slashing her abdomen. But this time, someone saw him. Witnesses spotted Thomas near the crime scene, and after a brief chase, police captured him. During his interrogation, Thomas did something unexpected. He confessed, not just to Cheryl's unaliving, but to everything. He admitted to unaliving Patricia Hitt. He confessed to unaliving Venora Hyatt. He even confessed to shooting Lexie Haynes when he was just 16 years old. When Thomas Whisenhant was booked late yesterday, he reportedly had already confessed to the brutal unalivings of Venora Hyatt back in April, and Cheryl Payton just this past weekend, a news reporter stated at the time. Whisenhant is quoted as saying that as long as he was with his wife and baby, he was all right, but when he was away from them, something came over him. The confession generated massive attention in Mobile County, and Thomas Whisenhant's trial was moved to Birmingham due to the intense publicity. On August 1, 1977, his trial for the unaliving of Cheryl Payton began. His defense attorney was Morris Dees, a well-known civil rights lawyer. Whisenhant pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Whisenhant's attorney, Morris Dees, pleaded his client innocent and innocent by reason of insanity to 3 unaliving charges, a reporter stated. Circuit Court Judge Velma Gray set a July 18th trial date. But despite the documented history of his troubled childhood, the abuse, the psychological evaluations, the jury didn't buy it. On August 9, 1977, Thomas Whisenhant was found guilty of capital unalivement. On September 7, 1977, he was sentenced to death. But here's where the story takes a bizarre turn. Thomas Whisenhant's original conviction was later reversed by the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals. He was retried in 1981 and convicted once again. However, his death sentence was overturned due to a remark made by the prosecutor during the sentencing phase. A new hearing was held, and in 1987, Whisenhant was sentenced to death for the 3rd time. And then he waited and waited and waited for 32 years, 8 months, and 20 days. What happens to a man's mind when he spends 32 years, 8 months, and 20 days on death row? Thomas Whisenhant's time in prison is shrouded in mystery. There are no personal writings, no documented conversations that reveal what was going on in his head. We know that there were appeals, overturned sentences, legal battles. But what about the man himself? Did he ever feel remorse? Did he ever truly understand the devastation he caused? Unfortunately, our sources don't offer a detailed glimpse into his day-to-day existence on death row. We know that there were appeals, that his sentence was overturned and later reinstated. There were likely interactions with lawyers and perhaps spiritual advisors, but no personal writings, no documented conversations that reveal what was going on in his mind. The silence is deafening. For 32 years, Thomas Whisenhant sat in a cell, knowing his execution date was coming. And through all of that time, he never spoke publicly about his crimes. He never expressed remorse. He never tried to explain. In September 1977, something chilling happened. Venora Hyatt's son, 26-year-old Kenneth Lynn Curry, kidnapped and robbed a taxi driver. When arrested, he claimed he committed the crime so he could go to prison and avenge his mother's death by killing Whisenhant. The pain Thomas caused didn't just end with his victims. It rippled outward, destroying families, shattering lives. On May 27, 2010, after more than 3 decades of legal battles and appeals, Thomas Whisenhant's time finally ran out. He was scheduled for execution via lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility near Atmore, Alabama. For his last meal, he chose chicken leg quarters, French fries, American cheese, orange drink, coffee, and chocolate pudding. Simple, unremarkable, the kind of meal anyone might order on any given day. But this wasn't any given day. As the execution team prepared the IV lines, Thomas Whisenhant was given the opportunity to make a final statement. This was his last chance to say anything, to apologize, to explain, to offer some closure to the families of his victims. He declined. That silence is deafening, one commentator reflected. It leaves us with this unresolved question, the sense of unease. Did he ever truly grasp the weight of his actions, the pain he inflicted on so many lives? Or was he, as the jury decided, fully responsible for his choices, despite his troubled past? At 6 p.m. on May 27, 2010, Thomas Warren Whisenhant was pronounced dead. He had spent 32 years, 8 months, and 20 days on death row, longer than any other prisoner in Alabama's history at that time. But the story doesn't end with his death. It lingers. It haunts. Lexie Haynes, the 72-year-old widow who confronted a teenage boy about his dangerous behavior. Patricia Hitt, the mother of 2 just trying to provide for her family. Venora Hyatt, whose wristwatch ended up on another woman's wrist. Cheryl Lynn Payton, whose life was stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. These weren't just names in a case file. They were daughters, mothers, friends. They had hopes, dreams, futures that were ripped away by one man's violence. And then there's the question that haunts every true crime case like this. Could it have been prevented? What if Willie Whisenhant hadn't lied to police in 1963? What if Thomas had been prosecuted for Lexie Haynes' unaliving when he was 16? What if the Air Force had kept him in prison longer after he nearly killed Rose Covington? What if someone, anyone, had intervened when Emma Whisenhant was raising her son in that toxic, abusive environment?